Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work as a high school teacher, where I see firsthand how important it is to follow rules and respect others. My husband and I don't have kids, so we often spend our weekends exploring local shops and trying new recipes. This particular weekend, we decided to check out a specialty grocery store we'd heard about. It was supposed to have an amazing selection of exotic ingredients, perfect for our culinary adventures. We were excited, but I had no idea our trip would turn into such an entertaining experience. As we pulled into the parking lot, it was clear this place was popular. Cars were everywhere, and we had to circle around a few times before finding a spot way in the back. I didn't mind the walk, though. It was a nice day, and I was looking forward to our shopping trip. That's when I saw her. This young woman in a shiny BMW pulling into the only open handicap spot right in front of the store. She parked crookedly, taking up part of the next spot too. I watched, waiting to see if she'd hang up a handicap placard or had a special license plate. Nope. She just hopped out, all designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, and strutted towards the store like she owned the place. I felt my blood start to boil. Who did she think she was? Those spots are reserved for people who really need them, not for entitled brats who can't be bothered to walk an extra few feet. I turned to my husband and asked him if he had seen what just happened. He confirmed that he had and agreed it was pretty low. I expressed my anger, suggesting that someone should teach her a lesson. My husband, however, advised me to let it go, saying it wasn't worth getting worked up over. But I couldn't let it go. As we walked into the store, an idea started forming in my mind. I grabbed a cart and told my husband I'd meet up with him later. He gave me a knowing look but didn't try to stop me. I spotted BMW girl heading towards the produce section, so I made my way there too. She seemed to be making a beeline for the berries, so I got there first. I started examining each package of strawberries like I was looking for hidden treasure. BMW girl tried to get my attention, but I pretended not to hear her, continuing to inspect the strawberries. When she spoke louder, I acted surprised and apologized, asking for her opinion on the strawberries. She tersely replied that they were fine and asked me to move my cart. I complied but only moved it a tiny bit. As she tried to squeeze past, I became very interested in the nearby blueberries. This pattern continued throughout the store. Whenever she tried to move to a new section, I'd beat her there and meticulously examine every item. She kept sighing and huffing, but I just responded with confused smiles. At one point, when she attempted to reach the bread aisle, I suddenly needed bread too. I started reading every ingredient list, muttering about gluten and preservatives. BMW girl expressed her frustration, slapping her thighs and asking if I was kidding. I feigned ignorance and offered her some artisanal sourdough to try. This cat and mouse game went on for about 15 minutes. I could see her getting more and more frustrated, her face turning an interesting shade of red. Finally, she managed to slip past me when another shopper distracted me for a moment. As she speed-walked away, pushing her cart like she was in a race, she turned and gave me the dirtiest look I've ever seen. If looks could kill, I'd have been 6 feet under. I responded with my best confused, innocent smile and wished her a nice day. As she moved towards the checkout, I saw a store employee approach her. Curious, I followed at a distance, pretending to browse nearby. The employee asked BMW girl if the car in the handicap spot was hers. When she confirmed it was, the employee politely but told her she needed to move it, explaining it was against store policy and the law. BMW girl protested, saying she was only going to be a few minutes, but the employee stood firm, mentioning the possibility of having the car towed. Frustrated, BMW girl agreed to move her car, complaining about the store as she left. I caught the eye of the employee and gave him a grateful nod. He winked back, clearly used to dealing with entitled customers. I met back up with my husband, who had managed to get most of our shopping done while I was playing my little game. He asked if I had fun, and I replied cryptically that justice had been served, one aisle at a time. We checked out and headed to our car. As we loaded our groceries, I saw a BMW girl peeling out of the parking lot. Sure, I added about 20 minutes to our shopping trip, but seeing that entitled brat get her comeuppance, totally worth it. Sometimes a little petty revenge is just what the doctor ordered. And who knows, maybe next time she'll think twice before taking a spot she doesn't need. After years of hard work and saving every penny, I finally bought my dream home in a quiet neighborhood. It was perfect. A spacious backyard, a pool, and friendly neighbors. Or so I thought. On moving day, I was unloading boxes when a woman marched up to me with a scowl on her face. She demanded to know what I was doing, and I explained that I was moving in as I had just bought the house. She then claimed that the backyard belonged to her family and that they had been using it for years. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but quickly realized she was serious. I tried to explain to her how property ownership worked, but she just warned me that we'd see about that before storming off. I shrugged it off as a weird encounter, little knowing it was just the beginning. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find a bunch of teenagers splashing around in my pool. Music was blasting, and empty soda cans littered my lawn. I marched over fuming. When I questioned them, one of the boys introduced himself as Karen's son and explained they were just having a little pool party. When I pointed out that they were in my backyard without permission, he casually mentioned that his mom said it was okay because they always used this pool. I was livid. I kicked them all out and went to confront Karen. I told her about her son and his friends using my pool without permission and insisted that it needed to stop immediately. She accused me of being selfish, claiming that the pool had been a neighborhood hangout for years and that I couldn't just come in and change everything. I stood my ground, reminding her that it was my property. This went on for weeks. I come home to find Karen's family using my yard like it was their own. I installed security cameras and even a fence, but they kept finding ways around it. Then, things got really crazy. I received a legal notice in the mail. Karen was trying to claim half of my property. She said she'd found an old map proving the land originally belonged to her family. I hired a lawyer, and we went to court. Karen's evidence was a crayon drawing her great-grandfather had made. The judge threw out the case, but Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of construction. I ran downstairs to find workers in my living room, literally building a wall down the middle of my house. When I demanded to know what was happening, Karen explained that since the court wouldn't give her what was rightfully hers, she was taking it herself. I told her this was insane and that she couldn't do this. I called the police and they came to remove the workers. By now the whole neighborhood was watching the spectacle. Someone must have tipped off the local news because a reporter showed up with a camera crew. The reporter asked me to explain what was happening, and I blurted out that my neighbor had lost her mind and was trying to steal half my house. Karen shouted back that she wasn't stealing anything and that the land belonged to her family. The homeowners association got involved next. They called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Karen showed up with a PowerPoint presentation about her family's historical claim to my property. It was complete nonsense, but she'd convinced a few gullible neighbors. The HOA president suggested trying to reach a compromise, but I insisted there was nothing to compromise about as it was my house. Karen accused everyone of being jealous of her family's legacy. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Karen's supporters started yelling about property rights, while my defenders argued about the sanctity of home ownership. It was like a bizarre town hall meeting from hell. Finally, we ended up back in court. This time, Karen had hired a fancy lawyer who tried to argue that communal property norms superseded my deed. The judge wasn't having it. He ruled that Karen's claims had no legal basis and that the property belonged solely to me. He warned her that if she continued to harass me or trespass on my land, she would face severe consequences. Karen ranted about taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court, while I requested a restraining order. The judge granted my request and Karen was ordered to stay away from my property. As we left the courtroom, she was still ranting about her family's legacy and how I'd stolen her birthright. In the end, Karen's husband finally intervened. He'd been suspiciously absent throughout this whole ordeal, and I found out why. He apologized profusely and explained that Karen had stopped taking her medication months ago. He promised to get her help and offered to pay for any damages. It took a while, but things eventually calmed down. Karen got the help she needed, and her family moved away a few months later. The new neighbors are much more reasonable, thankfully. My husband and I had always dreamed of living in the countryside. We both grew up in small towns, so when we got the chance to buy a farm in a rural area, we jumped at it. We spent months fixing up the old farmhouse and tending to the land. It was hard work, but we loved every minute of it. The peace and quiet were exactly what we needed after years of living in a crowded city. When we decided to get married, we knew we wanted to have the ceremony right here on our property. It seemed perfect. We could celebrate our love in the place we'd worked so hard to make our home. We didn't know many people in the area yet, but we thought it would be polite to let our neighbors know about the wedding. The couple behind us seemed nice enough when we first moved in, so we went over to tell them about our plans. We greeted our neighbors and informed them about our upcoming wedding plans for next month. The neighbor's response was oddly hesitant, simply acknowledging our news as interesting. His wife, however, expressed more enthusiasm, assuring us they would keep an eye out for the festivities. Something about their reaction seemed off, but I brushed it aside. We were too busy with wedding preparations to worry about it. The big day arrived and it was everything we'd hoped for. Friends and family came from all over to celebrate with us. We danced under the stars and fell asleep feeling like the luckiest people in the world. But that feeling didn't last long. The next morning I went out to grab the newspaper and nearly screamed. There, right in the middle of our driveway, was a severed goat head. I ran back inside shaking. I called out to my husband, urgently telling him he needed to come see something immediately. He asked what was wrong, noting that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I replied that it was worse than that, explaining that there was a goat head in our driveway. We called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without proof. We didn't have security cameras set up yet, so we had no way to know for sure who did it. But I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. I remembered seeing pictures of goats on our neighbor's social media. When I looked closer at the severed head, I noticed holes that lined up perfectly with where ear tags would be. We tried to go about our lives normally, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I saw our neighbor, I felt my heart race. We started looking into his background and discovered he had a criminal record. It made me wonder what else we didn't know about him. Weeks went by and we did our best to avoid any interaction with them. But one day, he showed up at our door. Our neighbor approached us asking if he could use our fence posts for a project he was working on. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Then, trying to appear casual, I inquired about how his goats were doing. As soon as I mentioned the goats, his whole demeanor changed. He started fidgeting and couldn't look me in the eye. He mumbled that the goats were fine and asked why I was curious. I tried to brush it off as simple conversation. Clearly uncomfortable, he quickly excused himself and hurried back to his property. That interaction left me feeling even more unsettled. I knew we needed to do something, but I was scared of what might happen if we confronted him directly. Finally, after days of debating, we decided to go back to the police. We told them everything. About the wedding, the goat head, our neighbor's reaction when we asked about his goats. They listened carefully and told us they'd look into it. A few days later, we got a call from the police station. They'd done some digging and found out our neighbor was on probation for a previous offense. The goat head incident was enough to violate his probation terms. They brought him in for questioning, and under pressure he confessed to leaving the goat head as some twisted form of congratulations for our wedding. He claimed he thought it would be funny, but the police didn't find it amusing at all. Our neighbor ended up going back to jail for violating his probation. His wife moved away shortly after, unable to face the shame of what had happened. Now, when we look out at our beautiful farm, we feel nothing but peace. And if we happen to see a goat, well, let's just say we appreciate it a lot more when it's alive and well in someone else's field. I've always been a car enthusiast, ever since I was a kid. My dad would take me to car shows on weekends, and I'd spend hours drooling over the sleek lines and powerful engines of sports cars. One model in particular caught my eye, a beautiful aerodynamic beast that seemed to embody speed and luxury. From the moment I saw it at 12 years old, I knew that someday I'd own one. Fast forward to my early 20s. I'd started my own tech startup right out of college, and after a few years of long nights and countless cups of coffee, things were finally taken off. We'd just closed a major deal that put us on the map, and I decided it was time to reward myself for all the hard work. That car I'd dreamed about for over a decade, it was time to make it a reality. I headed to the local dealership, heart pounding with excitement. The salesman greeted me as I walked in. He asked how he could help me today. I told him I was there to test drive my dream car model, explaining that I thought it was finally time to make my childhood dream come true. We went through the whole process: test drive, picking out colors and options, the works. After settling on the perfect configuration, we sat down to negotiate the price. It took some back and forth, but we eventually reached a number I was happy with. That's when things started to get a bit complicated. The salesman told me he had great news and that we had a deal. Then he explained that there was just one small thing: they didn't actually have this exact configuration on the lot. He said they would need to get it transported from another dealership about 30 miles away, which would take about a week. He asked if that was all right with me. I replied that while a week seemed long, I supposed I had waited this long already, so it should be fine. We wrapped up the paperwork with the dealership manager signing all the necessary documents. I was practically bouncing with excitement, already imagining myself behind the wheel. But as I was getting ready to leave, something caught my eye on the final invoice. I asked about a $150 transportation fee I noticed. The manager explained it was for moving the car from the other dealership. I pointed out that they had never mentioned this during our negotiations, and that I could drive out there and get it myself for less than that. The manager's face twisted into a smug grin that made my blood boil. He told me it was too bad I had already signed the contract, suggesting I should have been more observant. He said they couldn't take the charge off now. His tone made it clear he was thrilled to have pulled one over on me. I was furious, but there wasn't much I could do at that point. The contract was signed and I'd have to eat the extra cost. A week later, I returned to pick up my new car, still a bit sour about the sneaky fee, but excited to finally drive my dream machine. To my surprise, the same manager approached me as soon as I walked in. He said he needed to speak with me in his office before handing over the keys. Confused, I followed him. Once we were seated, he cleared his throat. He explained that there had been a small mistake with the invoice. He said the car I was getting was fully loaded, including what they called the gold package. All the emblems and lettering were in gold instead of silver. He informed me that this package came with an additional cost of $400 that they had neglected to add to the invoice, and that I would need to make up that difference. I was stunned. They'd never even mentioned a gold package during our discussions. But as I sat there staring at the manager's expectant face, a plan formed in my mind. I threw his own words back at him, saying it was too bad he had already signed the contract and that he should have been more observant. I said that I was going to pick up my car with the VIN that's on the contract for the price on the contract. I stood up, savoring the moment as the manager's face fell. He knew he was beaten, trapped by the same tactic he'd used on me a week earlier. If he hadn't been such a jerk about the transportation fee, I might have considered negotiating. But now, this felt like justice. The manager reluctantly acknowledged my point and said he would get my keys. The extra $250 I'd saved was nice, but the real victory was seeing that smug manager get a taste of his own medicine. And you know what? The gold looked even better with my chosen color than the silver would have. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.